I still think about that night sometimes, usually when I'm half asleep and the room is quiet enough that every little sound feels too loud. It happened years ago, back in 2007, in a city that always smelled like rain and old concrete. I was younger then, dumber too, and way too confident for my own good. It started with a bad date. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quietly awful. I'd gone out with a coworker named Elise. We weren't romantic or anything serious. More like two people killing time and pretending it meant something. We met up near the River District, a place full of flickering streetlights and bars that never felt fully clean. At first, it seemed fine. We laughed, shared drinks, talked about nothing important. Then, right at the end of the night, Elise said something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was casual. The kind of comment someone makes when they don't realize how cruel or strange it sounds. I don't even remember the exact words anymore. Just the feeling. Like a cold hand sliding down my spine. Whatever spark I thought was there went out instantly. So I said goodbye, awkward and stiff, and watched her walk away under the buzzing streetlights. The moment she was gone, regret hit me. Not because I liked her, but because now I was alone, tipsy, and stuck taking the night bus home. The night bus was never a good place. Everyone knew that. It was where the tired, the angry, and the half-broken all ended up together in the dark. The air inside always smelled like damp clothes and old metal. The lights flickered just enough to mess with your eyes. I sat halfway down the bus, slouched in my seat, feeling smug and miserable at the same time. I kept telling myself I'd done the right thing, that I had standards, that I wasn't desperate. 5 minutes later, all of that confidence collapsed. I stared at my reflection in the window and felt stupid, lonely, and annoyed at myself. That's when the voices started. At first, it was just laughter behind me, low and sharp, like something snapping. Then words, ugly words, slurs tossed around like they were jokes. I tried to ignore it, stared straight ahead, counted the stops in my head, but the insults were aimed at me. I could feel it, like fingers poking at the back of my neck. Maybe if I'd stayed quiet, nothing else would have happened. I think about that a lot. But I didn't stay quiet. I turned around and snapped back at them. There were only 2 other passengers. 2 men sitting in the back row. One was thin, almost stretched, with greasy hair sticking straight up like it had been shocked. The other was huge, not just tall, but wide. His shoulders filled the seat. His eyes looked flat, like they didn't really focus on anything. They stared at me, smiling, not friendly smiles, the kind that don't reach the eyes. For a moment, the bus was quiet, too quiet. Then they started pounding on the back of my seat, not hitting me, just enough to shake everything. The noise echoed through the empty bus. Thump, thump, thump. One of them slapped the window hard, over and over, like he was trying to break it. My heart started racing. I stood up and moved closer to the front. I don't know why I thought it would help. The bus felt longer suddenly, like the aisle had stretched. They followed me. Every time I sat down, they dropped into the seats behind me. Their voices got louder, meaner. One of them leaned close and whispered about cutting me open, about how easy it would be. I could smell his breath, sour and thick. I glanced toward the driver. Her name was Marla. I recognized her right away, once I really looked. She drove this route all the time. Big woman, calm voice. The kind of person who made you feel safer just by being there. She met my eyes in the mirror and shook her head slowly, warning me to stop engaging. I tried to move again. That's when hands grabbed me. Rough fingers dug into my jacket and shoved me down. Hard, I gasped. Tried to stand again. Another shove. The third time, my head slammed back against the seat with a loud crack. White light exploded behind my eyes. The sound echoed through the bus like a gunshot. Marla yelled for everyone to calm down. Her voice was sharp now, angry. I staggered forward and stood right behind her. She told me not to get off yet, said she'd handle them. Her jaw was tight, like she already knew this wasn't going to end cleanly. When I went back to sit down, everything got worse. One of them grabbed my head and yanked it back. I couldn't breathe. My throat burned. Panic flooded in, hot and blinding. I kicked and twisted until I slipped free and fell into the aisle, crawling away on my hands and knees. That's when the big one stood up. He stepped toward Marla and pulled a long knife from his waistband. The metal caught the light. My stomach dropped. He said something low and horrible, something about making her suffer. Marla didn't scream. She hit the gas. The bus lurched forward, then slammed into something solid. The sound was deafening. Glass shattered. The big man flew through the air, his knife spinning away from him. He hit the front so hard, I heard bones break. He dropped like a sack of meat, completely still. The bus door was open. Cold air rushed in. Marla was already out of her seat, yelling for help. Then she tackled the other man and pinned him to the floor, sitting on his chest until he stopped fighting. I stood there shaking, staring at the unconscious body near the front. The smell of blood and burned rubber filled the air. The police came. The men were taken away. I walked home alone, every shadow following me. Marla kept driving that route after that. I saw her sometimes. We never talked about it, but I never forgot. And I never take the night bus anymore. I still think about that night every time I pass through Riverside Market, even though it's been years, and the place looks so different now. It's bright these days, clean, full of cafes and little shops that sell candles and notebooks and overpriced coffee. But back in 2004, it wasn't like that at all. And one night there still crawls around in my head, refusing to settle. I was 19, living just outside the city, crashing on couches and spare beds while I figured out what I was doing with my life. My cousin Lena had moved downtown that year with her boyfriend, and she invited me over for a casual get-together. Nothing wild. Just music, cheap drinks, people talking too loud in a tiny apartment. I stayed later than I meant to. I wasn't drunk, just that floaty kind of lightheaded you get when you haven't eaten enough and you've laughed all night. When it was time to leave, Lena offered to walk me part of the way, but her boyfriend was sick and I didn't want to make a fuss. I told her I'd be fine. It was already close to midnight when I stepped outside. The rain hit me right away. Not a gentle rain either. It came down hard, cold, and noisy, bouncing off the pavement and soaking my clothes in seconds. The streets were nearly empty, and everything echoed in that strange way cities do late at night. My bus wasn't coming for another half hour, so I decided to cut through Harbor Station instead. It had an underground walkway that led closer to my stop. I hated that station. Everyone did. The escalators were broken most of the time, and the elevator was old and slow and made horrible grinding sounds. I've never liked elevators, so I chose the stairs. A long, twisting staircase that dropped deep underground. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to mess with your eyes. As soon as I started down, the air changed. It smelled damp and old, like rust and wet concrete. My footsteps echoed loudly, and I remember thinking how alone I felt all of a sudden. Then I heard someone else. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just echoes. But after a few steps, I slowed down, and the sound slowed too. I stopped completely. So did the footsteps behind me? That's when my stomach tightened. I kept going, my heart starting to beat faster. The footsteps followed again, soft but steady. Whoever it was stayed just far enough back that I couldn't see them when I glanced over my shoulder. Then came the sound that really scared me. A quiet whistle. Not a tune. Just a long, thin note, like air slipping through teeth. It floated up the stairwell and wrapped itself around me. I felt it more than I heard it. I picked up my pace. The footsteps sped up too. I stopped again. They stopped again. My hand went straight into my bag, fingers closing around my keys. I held them tight, metal digging into my skin. My mouth was dry, and my thoughts were racing. I didn't want to run and fall. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to know who was behind me. The whistling came again, closer this time. I could feel someone watching me. I don't know how else to explain it. It was like pressure on my back, like eyes pressed right between my shoulder blades. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, my legs were shaking. I hurried through the underground hallway toward the platform, praying someone else would be there. The platform was empty. I actually let out a small sound, half frustration, half fear. And that's when I heard footsteps again, much louder now, rushing down the hall behind me. "Hey," a voice said suddenly. "You all right?" I jumped so hard, I almost dropped my bag. A man stepped out from behind one of the pillars. He looked normal, too normal. Early 40s, maybe, neat jacket, clean shoes, holding a briefcase like he'd just come from work. He smiled gently, like he was used to calming people down. I rushed over to him without thinking and told him someone had followed me down the stairs. He listened, nodding, eyes calm. He said it was probably nothing, but that I could stand with him until the train came. Then he said, almost casually, "Looks like whoever it was gave up." That's when she appeared. She crept out of the hallway, slow and hunched, like she didn't want to be seen. She was young, around my age, but looked worn down, like life had chewed her up already. Her clothes were dirty and too big. Her hair stuck to her face in wet clumps. And her shoes didn't match. One sneaker. One old boot with a split sole. The second she saw us, her face changed. Her eyes locked onto the man beside me, and all the color drained from her face. She froze, completely still. Then she screamed, a sharp, broken sound that echoed across the empty platform. She turned and ran. As she disappeared down the hall, I heard that same whistling sound again, but this time it was wild and panicked. The train pulled in moments later. The man stayed with me during the ride. He got off at the same stop I did and walked me most of the way home. I thanked him over and over. He just smiled and said I should be more careful at night. I didn't think about it again until days later when I told Lena the story. That's when the question hit me. Why was that girl so terrified of him? He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken to her, hadn't threatened her at all. She didn't just run. She fled like she'd seen something she recognized, something she knew. I never felt afraid of him. Not once, but she did. And sometimes, when I think back on her scream, the way her eyes widened when she saw his face, I wonder if the thing that saved me that night was the most dangerous thing on that platform. And I don't think I really want to know the answer. I've told this story a few times over the years, usually late at night, when people are relaxed and laughing and not really expecting anything dark. It always starts out harmless. A dumb teenage crush, a boring vacation, nothing special. That's what makes it worse. This happened in 2004, when I was 15. My aunt dragged me along on a week-long ferry trip that sailed between small coastal towns. It wasn't some fancy cruise. It was old, creaky, smelled like salt water and cleaning chemicals, and felt like it belonged in another decade. I didn't know anyone. My phone barely worked, and I was stuck sharing a tiny cabin with my aunt and her boyfriend, who argued in whispers every night. I was miserable. The first time I saw the girl was during the safety briefing. Everyone was packed together on the main deck, sweating under the sun. People complained. Kids cried. Crew members shouted instructions that no one listened to. That's when I noticed her standing near the rail, completely still. Her name, I'd later learn, was Mara. She looked totally out of place. While everyone else wore bright shirts and shorts, she was dressed in dark gray, almost black, with heavy boots and a hoodie pulled up despite the heat. Her hair hung in her face, and she stared out at the ocean like she was watching something move just beneath the surface. Something about her made my stomach tighten. Not in a bad way. More like that nervous feeling you get right before something important happens. Later that night, my aunt sent me off to explore the ferry on my own. I wandered until I found a small game room tucked near the back of the ship. Half the machines were broken. A few little kids were playing loudly, slapping buttons and laughing. Mara stood in the corner near a flickering light, picking at her nails and watching them with this strange, irritated smile. Every time a kid messed up, she muttered something under her breath. I couldn't hear the words, but her tone was sharp, almost angry. One kid looked at her and froze, like he'd just realized he wasn't alone anymore. I should have walked away. Instead, I introduced myself. I said my name was Eli. She told me hers was Mara, then added very casually that she didn't like people and especially didn't like boys. I laughed awkwardly and said I probably deserved that. To my surprise, she laughed too. It wasn't warm. It was quick and sharp, like a bark. We talked for a while, mostly complaining. About adults. About school. About how everything felt fake. The longer we talked, the more she leaned closer, lowering her voice, like she didn't want the walls to hear us. That was the first thing that really creeped me out. The way she kept glancing around, like the ferry itself was listening. Over the next few days, she kept finding me. No matter where I went, she'd appear, near the snack bar, on the upper deck, outside the bathrooms. Sometimes she'd just stand there smiling until I noticed her. Then she started doing things. Small things at first. Tripping people as they passed. Slipping items into strangers' bags. Knocking drinks out of kids' hands and whispering, "Oops," in a fake sweet voice. Once, she convinced an elderly man that his wallet had been stolen, then helped him search for it while quietly dropping it into a trash chute. She told me it was fun to see how easily people panicked. One afternoon, she led me into a restricted hallway that smelled like oil and metal. She pulled out several stolen items from her pockets and laid them out like trophies. When I told her she needed to stop, her smile vanished. She leaned in close and whispered that if I told anyone, she'd say I'd hurt her. That everyone would believe her. I believed her too. Things got darker fast. She terrified children for fun. Told them lies about accidents and disappearances. Watched their faces crumble. She laughed when they cried. The sound of it echoed in the metal corridors long after they ran away. The breaking point came at the small pool deck. She showed up wearing a swimsuit covered in strange symbols, her eyes bright with excitement. She pulled a handful of sharp metal tacks from her pocket and said she wanted to scatter them down the water slide. Just to see, she said. I told her no. I told her my younger cousin was swimming nearby. Her expression changed instantly. Cold. Furious. She started asking questions about my family, where we slept, which cabin we stayed in, details she shouldn't have known. I grabbed the tacks and threw them overboard. That night, she asked me to meet her near the stern. When I got there, she was already waiting. She grabbed me, slammed me into the railing, and hissed in my face. She told me I'd ruined everything, that she could destroy my family if she wanted, and she told me to climb over the rail and jump. When I refused, she tried to push me. I don't remember deciding to hit her. I just remember grabbing the emergency ring and swinging. The plastic cracked against her head. She fell back, stunned. People came running. Crew members pulled us apart. Security footage backed me up. Mara vanished after that. The crew never found records of her. No family, no ticket, no cabin assignment. They believed she'd been hiding on board the entire time. To this day, I don't know who she really was. But sometimes, when I'm near the ocean at night, I still think about the way she stared into the water, like she was waiting for something to stare back. This happened a few years ago, back in 2018, and I still think about it more than I'd like to admit. I was flying from Denver to Seoul, heading out to visit my older sister Maya, who had moved there for work. We'd always been close, and I hadn't seen her in almost a year. I should have been excited, but instead, I was a wreck. I hate flying. Always have. The noises, the pressure, the way you're trapped in the air with nowhere to go. And this wasn't a short hop. This was a long overnight flight that felt like it would never end. I tried to prepare. I really did. I watched calming videos. I downloaded soft music. I even paid extra for a premium seat, thinking maybe a little space would keep my nerves from spiraling. Before boarding, I took a small anti-anxiety pill, hoping it would knock the edge off. It worked a little too well. I boarded early, shoved my bag overhead, sat by the window, and blacked out almost immediately. Not sleep like you gently drift off. More like my brain just switched off. The next thing I remember is waking up hours later. The cabin lights dim, the plane humming in that low, endless way planes do at night. At first, I thought I was alone. The seat next to me was empty. No movement, no breathing. Just a folded magazine tucked into the seat pocket, like someone had been there and vanished. I ordered a soda from a flight attendant, took a few slow sips, and finally felt my shoulders relax. Then I noticed a shadow stretching across my tray table. Something heavy dropped into the seat beside me. The guy sat down hard, like he didn't care who he bumped. My drink sloshed. I turned, and he was already looking straight at me. Not a glance, not a polite nod, just staring. His name, I'd learn, was Rowan. Rowan looked like he hadn't slept in days. Stringy dark hair stuck out in odd directions, like he'd been rubbing his scalp nonstop. His beard was thick and uneven. His eyes were the worst part. Too wide, too shiny, like he was watching something behind my face instead of me. He leaned close and said, "Hey, I'm Rowan," his voice low and scratchy. Before I could respond, he pushed his hand into my lap for a handshake. I froze for half a second, then shook it just to make it end. His hand was damp, warm. He smelled wrong, like sour sweat mixed with something chemical, almost sweet but rotten at the same time. He told me he used multiple pronouns, then immediately launched into his life story. No pauses, no breathing space. He talked about underground fight clubs, experimental theater, secret projects no one else was smart enough to understand. He said people were afraid of his ideas, that he made them uncomfortable. He laughed at that, a quiet laugh like he enjoyed it. For nearly an hour, he talked at me, not with me, at me. Every time I shifted or looked away, he leaned closer. His knee pressed against mine. His arm rested just a little too far into my space. I finally said I needed the bathroom. Rowan stood, but only barely. I had to squeeze past him. His body didn't move out of the way so much as loom there, forcing me to brush against him. I felt his breath near my ear as I passed. I locked myself in the bathroom and just stood there, staring at the door. My heart was pounding. The plane creaked. Someone flushed a toilet nearby. I counted my breaths until my legs stopped shaking. When I opened the door, Rowan was right there, not waiting off to the side, not pretending to pass by, standing directly in front of me, blocking the narrow aisle. He leaned forward and took a slow, exaggerated breath through his nose. Loud, intentional, like he was breathing me in. Then he smiled. Not friendly, knowing. He stepped closer, pressed an arm against the doorway, and said casually, like he was asking the time, "We could have some fun in here." I said no, Fast, clear. He tilted his head and asked if I said no because I had issues with people like him. I told him no again. I told him I had a partner back home, that this wasn't happening. His smile vanished. He punched the wall beside the door. Not hard enough to draw attention, just hard enough to make a point. The sound echoed inside the small space. I ducked under his arm and rushed back to my seat. After that, he whispered. Not constant talking anymore. Whispering, ugly, sharp words. Threats that weren't quite threats. Things about what people deserve. Things about punishment. About women who think they can say no. Every time a flight attendant came near, he stopped. The moment we were alone, it started again. 10 hours. 10 hours stuck by the window, listening to someone talk about me like I wasn't human. I didn't sleep. I barely moved. My body felt locked in place, like if I shifted the wrong way, something terrible would happen. When we finally landed, I waited until he left the plane before I spoke to anyone. The flight attendant looked shaken when I told him everything. He asked why I hadn't said something sooner. I didn't have an answer. I spent the whole trip in Seoul looking over my shoulder, convinced I'd see Rowan's wide eyes in a reflection or feel that sour smell again. I never did. But even now, years later, when I'm on a quiet plane and the lights dim, I still think about that shadow falling across my seat, and how trapped I felt when it did. I was 19 in 2009, fresh out of high school, and taking night classes at a small community college in Ravenport, a foggy coastal city that never really felt awake or asleep. Back then, I didn't have a car, so I took the city bus everywhere. My Aunt Lydia, who I was living with at the time, warned me about it constantly. She called the bus a rolling box of bad luck, but I didn't have many options. Most nights, the bus felt gross more than scary. Old fast food smells soaked into the seats. The floor was sticky no matter how clean it looked. People talked to themselves, laughed at nothing, or stared too long. I got used to it. Still, every now and then, something felt off enough to make my skin crawl. One night in late October, a kind of night where the fog hangs low and the streetlights look blurry and wrong, I got on the bus after a long evening class. It was already dark, and the bus was half full. I took a seat near the middle, right next to a man I recognized. His name was Cal, and he lived 2 houses down from my aunt. We weren't close, but we'd chatted a few times over the trash cans, or while waiting for the mail. Cal looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were faded and smelled faintly of metal and sweat. He kept glancing at his watch and tapping his knee like something bad was chasing him. He didn't say hi. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight. A few rows up, someone else caught my attention. There was a guy sitting alone by the window. His name, I would later learn, was Evan, but at the time he was just this pale, shaking shape in my vision. He was wearing a heavy black coat, even though it wasn't cold. His face was slick with sweat, and he kept scratching at his neck so hard it looked like he might tear skin. Every few seconds, he jerked his head up and scanned the bus like he was afraid someone was about to grab him. The bus rattled and groaned as it moved, and every sound felt louder than it should have. The engine whined. The doors hissed. Somewhere near the back, something clanged softly over and over, like metal tapping metal. Evan's eyes finally settled on an older man sitting across the aisle. The old man was thin, hunched, and holding a canvas grocery bag tight against his chest. His name was Mr. Harris, though I didn't know that yet. He stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice the way Evan was watching him. For a long moment, nothing happened. The bus rolled on. Fog pressed against the windows like wet hands. Then Evan stood up. He didn't walk right. He stumbled sideways, bumping into seats, dragging his feet like they didn't belong to him. When he reached Mr. Harris, he leaned down and grabbed his shoulder. Hard. Mr. Harris flinched and looked up, his eyes wide and shiny with fear. Evan whispered something low and fast. I couldn't hear the words, but the sound of his voice made my stomach drop. Then he reached behind him and pulled out a knife. It was small but shiny, the kind that catches light even in the dark. My chest went tight. I stood up without thinking. Before I could move, Cal's hand clamped around my arm. His grip was iron hard. Don't, he said under his breath. You'll get yourself killed. For a second, I thought Cal was in on it. His voice was calm, almost bored, and that scared me more than yelling would have. I froze, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then Cal moved. He climbed over me into the aisle and charged forward, shouting, "Police! Drop it now!" Evan spun around, eyes wild. The knife flashed up just as the bus slammed to a stop. The force threw Cal forward, straight onto the blade. There was a wet, ugly sound. People screamed. Someone dropped the bag, and oranges rolled down the aisle like slow, bright marbles. Cal staggered back, clutching his arm. The knife stuck out of his bicep at a wrong angle. Blood soaked through his sleeve fast, dark and shiny. Evan stared at his hands like he didn't recognize them, then took a step toward Cal, reaching for the knife. That's when Mr. Harris stood up. He moved fast for someone his age. His grocery bag hit the floor, cans rolling everywhere. He twisted Evan's arm, locked it tight, and drove him down into the aisle. Evan howled, a sound that didn't even sound human. Other passengers piled on, holding him there as the bus filled with noise and panic. I ran to Cal. I tried to help, but my hands were shaking too badly. When I reached for the knife, he snapped at me not to touch it. Sirens came later, police, an ambulance. That's when I learned Cal was an off-duty officer, and Mr. Harris was a retired veteran who still remembered how to fight. I still take the bus sometimes. I still smell the metal and hear the engine groan. And every time someone stands up too fast behind me, my heart jumps like it did that night, trapped in a foggy bus with nowhere to run. This happened back in 2014, when I was a few years younger and a lot more trusting. My name's Evan, and at the time I was traveling overseas for work with my younger sister Claire. We were close, always had been. She came along because it was supposed to be safe, interesting, and honestly kind of boring in a grown-up way. Meetings for me during the day, sightseeing for us in the evenings. We were staying in a coastal country called Merrow Bay, the kind of place that shows up in travel ads with smiling people and bright skies. Old stone buildings sat right next to shiny glass ones. Palm trees leaned over cracked sidewalks. During the day, it felt warm and welcoming. At night, though, it felt quieter than it should have been. Too quiet. Like the world was holding its breath. Everyone told us the same thing. Don't walk alone at night. Stick to busy streets. Use official taxis only. We followed those rules at first, but nothing bad happened. Not once. Day after day passed without a single problem. And that's how it gets you. You stop being careful because you think you understand the place. On our second to last night, Claire talked me into taking a long walk after dinner. She wanted to see the lake outside the city. I didn't want to say no. She'd been cooped up all day while I worked, and the night air felt nice. We walked farther than we meant to. Street lights thinned out. The sound of traffic faded. At some point, neither of us could say exactly how far we were from the hotel. When we finally decided to head back, I called a taxi number posted in our hotel lobby. The paper looked official. Logo, phone number, everything. The driver arrived fast. Too fast, now that I think about it. He was smiling wide, like he was already happy to see us. He showed his ID when I asked. Everything checked out, at least on the surface. We got in. The car smelled strange. Not dirty, just sharp. Like old plastic and something sour underneath. The driver talked the whole time, laughing, asking where we were from. His words were broken, but his smile never slipped. Not once. As we drove, the road narrowed. Trees replaced buildings. The headlights carved thin tunnels through the dark. That's when I noticed another vehicle behind us. A van, no headlights. Just a shape, keeping the same distance no matter how fast or slow we went. I leaned close to Claire and whispered. She saw it too. She spoke to the driver, pointing behind us. He glanced in the mirror and laughed, said it was nothing. Said people drove like that out here. Said it was better not to look. That didn't sit right with me. My stomach felt tight, like when you miss a step in the dark. Then the van flashed its lights and signaled for us to pull over. The driver's hands started shaking. He didn't smile anymore. He whispered that we had to stop. Claire begged him not to. Told him to drive. Told him to go faster. He didn't listen. He pulled over anyway. The van stopped behind us. Its headlights turned on full blast, flooding the road with white light. Everything happened fast after that, but it's burned into my head like it was slow. The driver got out. Someone shouted. I heard a sharp click, like metal hitting metal. A masked man stepped into the light, pointing a gun at the driver's head. Another one came to our side and tapped the window with the barrel. Tap, tap, calm, patient. We were told to get out. Hands grabbed me, shoved me against the car. Rough, cold. They took my wallet, my phone, even my shoes. Claire was crying. One of them laughed when she begged, like it was funny. The driver was tied up and dragged toward the van. I kept thinking they were going to shoot him. I couldn't look away. The sound of the van door slamming shut echoed way too loud in the empty night. Then they made us undress, right there on the side of the road. No cars passing, no lights. Just trees and darkness, and those masks watching us. I remember how cold the air felt on my skin, how small and exposed everything suddenly felt. Claire was shaking so hard, I thought she might collapse. They took our clothes and shoes like trophies. Then they left. Just drove away. Took the car. Took the driver. Took everything. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. No insects, no wind. Just our breathing and the sound of blood rushing in my ears. We walked for hours, barefoot, cold. Every sound in the bush made us jump. Every shadow looked like someone watching us. At one point, we found a filthy blanket dumped in a ditch. I wrapped it around Claire and told her it was okay. I didn't believe it, but she needed to hear it. Eventually, lights appeared in the distance. A farmhouse. The people there called the police. The police didn't care. Not really. They asked questions like they were bored. They laughed at things we said. When we mentioned the driver being taken, they exchanged looks and shrugged. We left the country as soon as we could. But here's the part that still keeps me up. The night before we flew home, we went out for one last meal close to the hotel. Busy place. People everywhere. Music playing. Normal. I heard a laugh. I turned. At a table near the back sat the taxi driver. Clean. Relaxed. Eating and drinking with 3 other men. No masks. No guns. Just smiling like old friends. Our eyes met. The smile vanished from his face. He stood up and disappeared into the crowd before I could move. The other men stayed. When I confronted them, they pretended not to understand me. Smiled. Snickered. One of them pointed at my shirt and said, "Nice," like we were sharing a joke. I knew then. The whole thing had been planned. From the moment we got into that car. Sometimes I tell myself it could have been worse. But some nights, when it's quiet, I still hear that tap on the window.